Hi, Deanne LeBreton of the Clearship blog here. I'm at the John Rotman School of Management on the University of Toronto campus, having just seen a presentation on a book that I want to introduce you to called The Intangibles of Leadership. The author, Dr. Richard Davis, will be joining us in a minute. In the meantime, I want to thank everybody who responded to the first post. I really appreciated receiving your blog tips, book references, the invitation to lunch, and the updates on your change leadership. Great to know the progress that some of you are achieving. I also want to send a special shout out to Diane, Edith, Jeff, and Tony for tackling our first question, which dealt with why is it so damn hard to make positive change happen and stick. Interestingly, their answers pointed us to the topic of today's post. They encouraged us to look at not just what leaders need to do, but more importantly, who they need to be, referencing attributes like patience and perseverance, courage and risk-taking, resiliency, and not settling for the easy fix, but being bold and analytical, observational in tackling the underlying root causes of the problems that present themselves to us. So with that said, we're going to take a quick break here. Just turn off the camera and turn it on when Dr. Davis is ready to join us. Thanks very much. Hi again. Well, here I am with Dr. Richard Davis, who's asked me to call him Richard. So Richard, you've written this incredible book, The Intangibles of Leadership, the 10 qualities of superior executive performance. Before we get into those 10 qualities, I want to ask you this. If someone doesn't believe that they have those 10 qualities, how will you convince them, or how could I convince them to open the book and at least take a look?
Well, that's actually what it's all about. It's about building muscles around each of these 10 important nuances of leadership. And there are more beyond that, but it's not as though we are born with all of these incredible traits of leadership. It's about understanding what you have and recognizing what your strengths are, and then building on those and building on your development areas as well.
Okay, so before you became the author, the celebrated author, and the recognized expert on management psychology, how did you convince people to take a look at their psychology, their leadership attributes, instead of the other elements that might influence their performance, like their resources, the people they work with, etc.? How did you get them to focus on themselves?
Well, part of the fact of me coming in as a management psychologist, they kind of know that I'm talking to them about that. However, beyond that, most very successful people recognize that a big part of their success is due to who they are as individuals. We are all a function of our experiences and our journeys throughout our lives. So part of my job is to kind of put up the mirror and say, here's what I see, here's how you're coming across, and here's how your individual psychology comes across to other people, and what effect that has on your performance as an executive. And usually, if I do it in a compelling way, they're able to really get it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now, one of the reasons why this book is standing out is because it makes the case that situations require different kinds of leaders, or at a minimum, leadership attributes. You have 10 in the book. Are there some that are more relevant to the change, leadership, organizational transformation, etc., that we ought to focus on here?
Absolutely. In terms of change, I think there are two that really stand out for me. One of them is will. Will is really the real desire, the stick-to-itiveness to get things done. And throughout change, there are all kinds of barriers to moving forward. And effective leaders really do need to have the will, the deep desire to move forward, to get things done. And so I think that's a fundamental one. The other one is fortitude, and fortitude is really strength of character. It's courage. It's related to will in some ways, but it's really that deep strength of character to stand for what you strongly believe in and do what's right. And I think those two intangibles of leadership are directly linked to one's success in leading through change.
Now, getting to another one that's in the book, fallibility.
Yes.
I mean, so few of the leaders I've worked with are comfortable with, they're prepared to admit to their fallibility behind closed doors.
Yeah.
They're willing to admit to their limitations in front of a group. However, this notion of fallibility is something that I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, I mean, my own thoughts about fallibility began from some research on perfectionism, actually. And what I found is that perfectionistic leaders derailed at a certain point in their life. That they probably rose in the ranks to a certain level of success because they tried to be perfect and probably did a really good job in whatever they were trying to do. But at a certain level of leadership, perfectionism actually works against you. And so the flip side to that is not being a perfect leader, to really feel as though you don't have to be perfect. And it's sort of liberating when you get that, when you say, you know what, I don't have to be a plastic leader. I don't have to be perfect in the eyes of everyone else. I can fail, and it's okay. And sometimes it's communicating that, other times it's just being that. Now I want to make one distinction though that's pretty important. There is a distinction between fallibility and vulnerability. I think if in a lot of environments, if people are openly vulnerable, it can actually work against them. There's a difference in terms of fallibility. Fallibility is really about being human, recognizing that you're not going to be perfect all the time, being able to rely on other people and delegate out, and also be willing to take risks, which is another key tenet of fallibility. Those are different than vulnerability.
Another attribute that you focus on is wisdom.
Yes.
I wonder if you could just comment on that as well.
Well, most of what we know in organizational psychology tells us that intelligence is a strong predictor of success in leadership and most pursuits. Intelligence is in a lot of ways a price of admission characteristic for some level of leadership. What separates, at the same time, I also know a lot of successful people who really don't score that high on intelligence tests, and some really smart people who aren't successful in leadership. So the missing dimension there is, or the key dimension there is wisdom. And wisdom is intelligence plus perspective. And it's the ability to reflect on what you're seeing around you. It's having a global awareness of what's going on in the world. It's being able to communicate in a way that's compelling to other people. Those are the kinds of things that are inherent in wisdom, and that often happens over time. Some people are wise beyond their years, so it's not just about experience. Experience is an important part, but it's not all of it. So it's these key things that are really fundamental in having good judgment, making good decisions, and leading other people accordingly.
The last of the attributes that I want to talk about deals with the theatricality of leadership.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that again, a lot of the leaders that I know may not see themselves as theatrical. So what is it that you mean by that, so that they don't get caught off guard when they read the table of contents?
Yeah, right. Theatrical leadership is a component of presence. So to me, the best leaders that I know have a certain presence in a room. When they walk into a room, people sort of sit up a little straighter, and all eyes go to them when a decision is being made. And why that's important is, in order to influence people, you sort of have to have that. You have to take up some space in a room. In order to get that, one component of that is theater. In fact, we are all on stage to some extent, and especially senior leaders, CEOs, every little move or thing they say is really on a stage, whether they realize it or not. And it's important for most leaders to recognize how they're coming across. It's as if you're playing poker and you sort of reveal how you come across to other people and your tells. Those tells are really important.
What do you mean by tells?
Well, sometimes when you're playing poker, and if you have a really good hand, you may get all excited, and you may look a little different than when you're embarrassed if you have a bad hand. Those tells are really important. Likewise, in terms of theatrics of leadership, the tone and rate of your speech, that's part of leadership theater. That's part of creating impact. The way that you dress, the way that you come across, those kinds of things are absolutely critical components of presence and of leadership in general.
If someone wanted to, not if, as people tackle this book, What is your advice on how best to go about assessing their leadership attributes or psyche relative to the demands they face? How should they get started, and how should they stick with it?
Yeah. The neat thing about the book, what I intended to do with the book was to make it very readable and to be able to pick it up at any point and put it down at any point. So it's okay in this book to read a couple of chapters and self-evaluate. I mean, I think that's something that everyone will do when they read this book, is kind of take a look at this, the model of leadership or the model of good, and get a sense of how do they stack up against that. I think that's great. I think that sort of self-reflection is actually development in itself. So through this book, hopefully readers will be going through some sort of leadership development in their own right. And so it's okay to read a chapter, put it down, self-evaluate, and then pick it back up when something else becomes more relevant. Or likewise, to continue with the whole thing and sort of take it all in and self-reflect.
Okay, so as a final question,
yes,
off the first answer that comes to mind, why is it so damn hard to make positive change happen and stick?
Because people inherently don't want to change. They're comfortable in their circumstances, and it's very difficult to get people to actually be different.
And that's why we need leaders.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.